Disclaimer, there was a technical issue related to the microphone quality in this video, mainly related to incompetencies on my part. Most of the audio in this video sounds great, but some of it sounds pretty muffled, unfortunately. And I just do not have time to go back and redo all these audios, because that would take a lot of time, because then I gotta do the audio, say it, or whatever, and then I gotta go back and edit it and stitch it all back together, and it takes so much fucking time, and I just don't want to do that, so. But I felt like it was important enough to acknowledge. Anyways, on to the video. Welcome to part 2 of me nearly ranking 100 new movies that I saw from 2025. Starting off, the average category is The Thunderbolts. A lot of people were praising this movie to high heavens, but honestly I thought it was just painfully meh, maybe even close to mediocre. It just felt like Diet Suicide Squad, with a ragtag group of heroes being at odds with each other but eventually becoming a team. The story is just fine, I guess. There's some dumb stuff. I like David Harbour in the film, I found him to be pretty fun, and the emotional moment between him and Yelena was pretty good. The Sentry was a solid character, he added an interesting dynamic to the movie, Lewis Pullman did a great job, however I wish he got more development and screen time because his character is used as a vessel for the mental health themes, which I thought were a mixed bag. John Walker was a huge standout for me, even though the writers try to make him out as if he's worse than Satan at every corner, just like what they did to him in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, they accidentally made him very sympathetic, and their attempts to try to villainize him are hilarious. Like, for example, they show him in a flashback with his kid in a cradle and he's just looking at his phone, and the movie tries making him out to be a monster when he's literally doing nothing. His kid is still chilling in the cradle, he's not trying to get out or he's falling out or just nothing bad is happening, but the movie tries to make him out as if he's evil, just because he was looking at his phone while watching his kid. Another one is when the Sentry randomly appears. Walker susses him out for a good reason, and the movie tries making him out as if he's a complete asshole when he has every right to be suspicious and cautious. And later on, it's shown that Sentry is a government weapon, so he was kinda correct. And this is very persistent throughout the movie where they take every opportunity to belittle and patronize Walker, when 90% of the time he didn't do anything to warrant it. Despite that, though, I still thought he was a solid character. Yelena was a fine enough protagonist. Everyone else I didn't really care about or were utterly wasted. Ghost is a nothing character, she just exists. Taskmaster was killed at the beginning of the film, which I wasn't really upset about at all because not only was she a terrible adaptation of the Taskmaster character, but also she just sucked as a character. Bucky is completely wasted in the film. In a movie that tackles mental health themes, you'd think this would be perfect for him considering how much emotional baggage he has, but they don't even bother to do anything with it. And I think even Sebastian Stan is aware of this fact, judging by this advertisement.
Hey chat, Sebastian Stan here. I'm so excited for you to watch today's stream, so make sure to check out the custom Bucky skin, which also drops on May 2nd. It's so awesome. The streamers today got an early access. I hope you all love it. Armed and Dangerous. Again. The main antagonist is super forgettable and boring, just another generic evil government person. The action scenes in this film were pretty enjoyable and well choreographed, although the visuals were mostly nothing special. I did appreciate it when it got experimental, when they entered the void and were going through Sentry's random memories. The mental health themes are a mixed bag for me. Other times I thought it was super effective, but other times I thought it was super heavy-handed and didn't feel organic. Overall, this movie's just kinda whatever. Not great, but not terrible. The next movie is the How to Train Your Dragon remake, and it's pretty much what I expected it to be. This is certainly better than 90% of the live-action remakes. It doesn't make me want to scratch my eyes out. The CG looks good. It's cool to see Gerald Butler in a role that isn't generic action hero number 234, and it was cool seeing Nick Frost in a film again. But this is essentially the original film, but done worse and longer. One thing that stuck out to me as a huge glaring flaw compared to the first film is the chemistry between Hiccup and Astrid. It's almost non-existent in the remake. Astrid is a complete plank of wood, whereas in the animated film, she had plenty of personality. It's a fine movie on its own, but a very unnecessary remake. The next movie is A Working Man, pretty much the same as the last 200 Jason Statham films, where he plays a guy who has a generic blue-collar job, who's secretly a badass, but is then forced back into the life he left. This description fits 90% of his films. The stories are nothing special, but the action scenes get the job done. If you like these type of films, you're gonna enjoy this one. The next movie is Last Breath. The only notable thing that I can really say that I actually really liked is the underwater scenes. They looked really cool. Everything else is just kinda fine. Not amazing, but not bad. Just kinda middle of the road. But it is a good dad movie. The next movie is The Phoenician Scheme. This movie wasn't really for me. I thought it was cool for maybe 30 minutes, but I got bored pretty quick. It's the same shit we've seen from Wes Anderson, but it's gotten less compelling over time. It felt like a borderline parody of his style at times. If you're a Wes Anderson fan, you'll probably really like this film. It's very well shot, lots of colors, and it's very unique compared to a lot of other films. The next movie is Hurry Up Tomorrow, and this movie got a ton of hate. Like, one of the worst films of the year type hate. And honestly, I didn't think it was nearly that bad. Don't get me wrong though, as a Trader Schultz film, it's a huge disappointment. The cinematography and overall style is incredible, the original score by Oneohtrix Point Never is fantastic, but the story is just very meh. I didn't think it was awful, but I didn't think it was anything really good, especially compared to Schultz's previous movies. It definitely got self-masturbatory at times on The Weeknd's part. His acting was also pretty shoddy at times.
You able,
Shut the fuck up! Shut the fuck up! Shut up!
Overall, I didn't think it was nearly as bad as people thought, but I definitely thought it was a disappointment. The next movie is Final Destination 6. I had plenty of fun with this film. It has the creative set pieces and kills that you'd come to expect from this franchise. It was nice seeing Tony Todd one last time. The story and characters aren't really anything to write home about, which isn't really a deal breaker. I mean, it's a Final Destination film. The only complaint that I had with this film is that I thought they used too much CGI. Other than that, it's a fun time. The next movie is Predator Killer of Killers. I guess my main disappointment is that I think these mini-stories could have been cool if they were put into live-action films instead of being put into a 30-minute animated segment. The animation is pretty cool, and the action scenes are pretty fun, my favorite one being the samurai segment. However, I'm not really a fan of the third act of this film, with the characters being kidnapped to fight each other on the Predator homeworld, and whoever wins has to fight the toughest Predator, which I think shits on the lore a bit. I thought it was cool that they would let you live if you're able to kill one of their own. Hell, they might even give you a reward. But this film completely shits all over this and makes me question why didn't they kidnap Danny Glover here? It's a cool concept with an okay-ish execution. The next movie is Good Boy, and I already talked about this one in my October video. In short, it was a cool movie. The dog acting and the directing was very well done. The horror elements aren't really anything amazing, but it works well enough for this kind of movie. The only issue I had with it is that I thought the movie overstayed its welcome, which is kind of crazy because it's only like 70 minutes. But overall, I liked it for what it was. The next movie is Eddington, and I thought it was meh. I didn't really find any of the characters that interesting. If anything, they felt close to being political stand-ins, which I don't think the movie had really anything new or interesting to say about the political climate of 2020. Not saying that has to take a side or anything, but at least say something new. But it just felt like stuff that we've seen and heard already. I didn't really buy it when the main character started going off the rails. It just felt like shit was happening from here on out. Like Antifa coming out of nowhere decked in military gear trying to kill the main character. It just kind of gets to a point of absurdity, and I kind of like that, and I think the movie was very aware of it. With it being an Ari Aster film, it's of course very well shot, plenty of long takes, excellent framing, great soundtrack, and the licensed music choices were good. Overall though, if you watch the teaser trailer for the movie, that's exactly what you're going to get. The next movie is Fantastic Four, which I was expecting to be way worse, but ended up just kind of being fine. I liked all the characters. Johnny Storm was a big standout with him being very jokey, but also showing that he's very smart. Vanessa Kirby was given plenty of good moments. Pedro Pascal was fine in the movie, but I wish they used his powers in a more creative way. He wasn't really given any moments to shine with his stretching ability. I wish they gave The Thing more stuff to do. He had great chemistry with Johnny, but wasn't really given much to do as a character outside of the movie building up to him saying it's clobbering time. I like the style and presentation of the film, with the future retro look, something akin to the Jetsons or Fallout. It felt as if the movie had an actual pulse compared to the Thunderbolts or Captain America 4. The theme by Michael Giacchino was great. Where the movie shits the bed for me is the villains. They aren't given a ton of depth, especially Galactus. He looked pretty cool and Ralph Ineson did a great job, but his character just ended up being pretty mediocre and was just really stupid. Silver Surfer was given a bit more depth, but still. The third act was very rushed. A lot of dumb shit happens here. Overall, this movie doesn't really move the needle for the MCU that much, but I ended up liking it a lot more than I expected. The next movie is Superman, and this is one of the bigger disappointments of the year. I was really excited for this film because of James Gunn's previous work being pretty solid. However, this ended up just being a huge mess. It crams so much shit into one film that we hardly have any time to build character or have heart. Most of the characters in the film don't have an arc or anything special because it's just super rushed. It's like if the MCU started with the Avengers instead of Iron Man. It feels like a sequel to a movie that doesn't exist. The humor is also a problem. The moments that should be used for sentimental character development are ruined by James Gunn humor. It made it really hard to really give a shit about what was going on because we're constantly having humor shoved down our throats. There's very little character moments due to them juggling so much shit. When the movie attempts to do one, it's interrupted by the humor. The only scene that wasn't cut at the knees by the humor was the scene between Pa Kent and Clark, which I thought was the best scene in the film. The trailers looked a lot more serious too, which I was hoping for a more character-focused Superman movie that took itself seriously when it needed to. I'm not asking for MOS levels of seriousness. I still want the corny, cheesy comic book nature, but also show restraint for the more character-focused scenes. Nothing wrong with it having jokes, it just needs to be implemented appropriately. Nick Holt gives an amazing performance as Lex, but the plot holds him back from being a good villain. It falls for the same pitfalls a lot of high-intelligent characters get stuck in when written. They're only as smart as the person writing them. Like for example, when Mr. Terrific goes to one of his bases and starts putting belt to ass, no alarms were set off, somehow no one contacted him about this, and with how serious this is, you'd think he would have gotten wind of this very quickly and sent Ultraman to pack him up. But nah, he just didn't know. And there's also more examples of him doing stupid stuff. As for the positives, Cornsweat is great as Superman. Superman is written pretty well and embodies the character. It was nice seeing him do his best to try to limit the amount of destruction and casualties while in battle. Classic Superman stuff. Nathan Fillion as Guy Gardner was a scene stealer. Mr. Terrific was a fun character. The action scenes were fun, and the music was good. I like the style, of course, with it being a James Gunn film. The only complaint I had was that there's this weird blue filter over the film that made it look kinda shitty at times. What I was originally expecting, a more character-focused film, ended up just being average cape shit, unfortunately. The next movie is Fight or Flight. It's another interchangeable action flick. It definitely has plenty of cringe humor or quips that you'd see from this type of movie. There's a needle drop in the third act that I enjoyed, but wasn't really that creative. A lot of my criticisms boil it down to it feeling like any other modern action flick. With that being said, I had a lot of fun with this film. The pacing was pretty solid, it felt like Bullet Train, but if it was leaner. Some of the humor in this film is cringe or MCU-ish, but it doesn't drag it out like Bullet Train. The story isn't that great, but it doesn't try to act like it has this grand interconnected story that Bullet Train attempts to have. I know I'm comparing it a lot to Bullet Train, but the plot and the setting are pretty similar, and it just seemed like a better version of that movie to me. The action sequences were really fun. The only complaint I had with the action is that some of it had too much shaky cam and some of the cuts felt awkward, but otherwise I had fun with it. It's a solid airplane movie, no pun intended. The next movie is Together. I don't really remember a lot about this movie. The story was whatever, the two leads were fine, the body horror stuff was cool, but obviously didn't really leave a huge impact on me. The next movie is The Monkey. It's about this monkey toy, and every time you turn its key, it kills someone. It leans heavily into dark comedy, with the many absurd deaths. The story itself is pretty forgettable. The main conflict of the film involves this sibling rivalry between these twin brothers, and there's not really a ton of depth to it. The movie's just a fun horror comedy to turn your brain off to and watch Looney Tunes level violence. The next movie is Nobody 2. I was hoping for this one to blow me away with its action like the first one did. The director of this film made a really solid action flick before this, so I was really looking forward to it. However, it ended up just kind of being very generic. There are some standout action scenes and good camera work. The action is overall good, but not great. The story is a boring retread of the first film, but I could have ignored that if the action stood out. I was hoping to be amazed, but I walked out with a strong meh feeling. If you liked the first film, you'll get some decent entertainment out of this sequel. Then I watched The Toxic Avenger, and I enjoyed this one. It's very much in line with the other Toxic Avenger films, completely embraces the B-movie tone, has the charm of the Troma films, has the dark humor, the low-hanging fruit that is expected from these films. There's plenty of fun gore and kills. It didn't blow me away, but I appreciate what it's doing. The next film is Nuremberg, and it's very much an Oscar bait historical drama. The style is very Oscar baity. I think the standout in the film is easily Russell Crowe, mainly because he hasn't given a good performance in years, so it was nice to see him in a film that wasn't total ass. The film isn't awful, it's competently made, doesn't really push any boundaries, it gets the job done enough to be fine. If you're interested in the subject matter, you might get a good time out of this. The next movie is Sisu 2, and I like this one just as much as the first film. Pretty much what you would expect from a sequel to Sisu, plenty of entertaining action and ridiculous moments. It didn't scratch my action itch completely, but I can see tons of people really enjoying this movie. The next film is Avatar 3, pretty much the same as the other Avatar films. Some of the most jaw-dropping visual effects ever made, but the story is painfully generic. And holy hell, this didn't need to be over 3 hours long. I hope James Cameron moves on to doing something different. It's a cool movie to see in theaters, especially in 3D, but not much else past that. And the last film in this category is Mission Impossible 8. What really drags this film down for me is the runtime. It didn't need to be nearly 3 hours long. It makes this such a chore to get through considering that the plot itself is super convoluted and silly, which most of the films in this franchise have silly plots. So I don't really need an amazing plot to enjoy these films. But man, there's plenty of shit in this movie that adds nothing to the plot or the action. It's just filler. The action sequences in this film are great. The climax with the biplanes is some of the best action I've seen in years. but I hate how much unnecessary shit is in this movie that I have to get through to get to those action sequences. I watched a fan edit of this that cut nearly an hour out of this film, and it moves smooth as butter. Don't get me wrong, the plot is still silly, but at least it has a solid pace and doesn't waste your time. The normal cut of this movie is such a slog. Great action, but man, this would have been a lot better if it was trimmed down. And now we are on to the decent/good category. Starting off this category is Mickey 17, which I already reviewed. This movie was a huge disappointment coming from Bong Joon-ho, who previously made Parasite. For the things that I liked, I thought Robert Pattinson gave a very fun performance. He continues to show how much range he has as an actor, in particular when he has to play multiple characters in the film. They play around with the premise in some fun ways, the general premise being that Mickey is sent out on suicide missions, but he can be brought back to life via cloning. However, one of the Mickeys survives their mission, and now you have multiple Mickeys running around. The visuals looked really good, especially in an age where most blockbusters don't care about crafting good CGI. The creatures were pretty cool, the dark humor was very good, the social commentary was interesting at times, but it's also where the movie lets me down. It's painfully unsubtle. It felt like I was watching an Adam McKay film. A lot of this stems from Mark Ruffalo's character, who's just another generic Trump allegory, and he takes up a good chunk of the third act, which brings it down for me. Despite it being disappointing, I still thought it was a decent movie. The next film is Ballerina, and this is my favorite action movie of the year, hands down. This has some of the best action sequences I've seen in years. It's on par with the other action sequences from the previous John Wick films, the flamethrower set piece, the box of grenades set piece, the diner set piece. All of these scenes were pure visual eye candy. Fun choreography, super over the top and ridiculous in all the best ways. I loved how this film becomes Resident Evil 4, where the main character fights her way through a village of assassins. Despite John Wick not being in the film that much, they made every single second count with him. The movie has the awesome aesthetic as the previous movies, the music was awesome. I'd love to throw this movie up into great or Kino category, but I gotta be realistic here. The story is far from good, it's pretty dumb. Which isn't necessarily a huge negative for me personally, because the John Wick sequels have pretty dumb stories, but the movie puts a lot of focus on the story in the first act or so, and so it feels like a complete slog to get through. But after that first act, it's a fun amusement park ride. Another gripe that I have is that I wish Norman Reedus was in the film a lot more, and I wish he was given a lot more to do in the film with the time that he has. Even with a lot of those flaws, this is still my favorite action movie of the year, and I'm really sad that it bombed at the box office. The next movie is Lurker. It's about this random dude who becomes friends with this up-and-coming pop star, however it turns into an obsession. The obsession part has him doing a lot of stuff that's extremely cringe-inducing. This movie is like Friendship, which is another film that came out this year, but a lot darker. I didn't really connect with the film as much as other people, but I respect it. The cringe scenes were very effective, and I had to just look away or ignore it at times because it was so bad. The filmmaking aspect is pretty good. I don't remember a ton about the soundtrack, but I remember it mostly lacking music, which made the cringe scenes a lot more impactful. A lot of it boils down to the main character being very awkward, not understanding social cues, or just doing too much, if you get what I mean. Like, you'll have a friend that tries way too hard to be funny that it comes off as a bit cringe. Similar to that, but like in a different context of doing something too much, and it leads to other characters being weirded out by him, which in turn leads to more cringe because you're just sitting there begging the main character to shut the fuck up. Although I didn't like this movie as much as a lot of people, I think it accomplished what it was doing decently. The next movie is Companion. It's about this couple hanging out with some friends over the weekend. One of the people in this couple, the girl, is an AI companion bot, and some crazy stuff starts happening. Solid horror flick, plenty of good kills and gore. I liked how they played around with the idea that the main girl is an AI companion bot. For example, they can control how she acts by making her more aggressive or less aggressive. They can make her extremely intelligent or completely stupid. I like that part of the story a lot. I think they balanced the horror and comedy elements quite well. I don't have a ton to say about this movie because this was like one of the first movies I saw last year, but I thought it was good. The next movie is Becoming Led Zeppelin, which is the first documentary to appear on here. The story of the documentary is okay. It's about how they found the band, and it seemed like most of them ran into each other, and one thing led to another, which led to the creation of Led Zeppelin. I think the best parts of the documentary are the live concert performances. It kind of felt like a best-of compilation. Not the most groundbreaking story, but I enjoyed watching it mainly due to the music. The next movie is The Accountant 2. Not as good as the first film, but I still liked it. Most of my enjoyment came from the chemistry between Jon Bernthal and Ben Affleck, not only because they're great actors, but it's awesome seeing these characters again after nearly a decade. They have such a fun dynamic, and it easily carries the film. It led to plenty of comedic bits too, surprisingly. I didn't expect this movie to be as jokey as it was, but it worked out really well. And what makes the dynamic unique, of course, is the fact fact that Ben Affleck's character has autism, and seeing his personality clash with Jon Bernthal's very extroverted personality led to a lot of great stuff. The main plot is okay, but not as compelling as the first film. Stylistically, it's pretty flat, unfortunately, just like the first film. The action was decent, but most of your enjoyment is going to come from Jon Bernthal and Ben Affleck. They were awesome in this movie. The next movie is 28 Years Later. It's really awesome seeing Danny Boyle finally return to this universe. I really loved the style. This is one of the most unique looking films I've seen in a long time. The iPhone camera quality plays a huge role in this. The editing is very experimental. For example, when a zombie gets shot in the head with an arrow, there's this Matrix-like effect where the movie pauses and has each of these iPhone cameras take a picture, which creates this cool looking shot. The editing and camera work is very reminiscent, of course, to 28 Days Later. The soundtrack by Young Fathers is excellent. It's very avant-garde and weird, which fits perfectly. All the acting was very solid. The standout for me being Ralph Fiennes, who plays this doctor character. He's very weird, very quirky. His character was awesome, and I'm glad we got to see more of him in the Bone Temple. I also thought the child actor who played Spike did a great job. The first 40 minutes of this film is super gripping and tense, with Spike and his dad fighting their way through the infected. However, the film takes a completely different turn and becomes a lot less interesting. The writing also took a dip in quality. The plot started to become very contrived at times. There are plenty of moments where people just so happen to be at the exact same place at the exact same time. For example, Spike and his mom run into this gas station and are about to be killed by the infected when this random military dude that we saw earlier just so happens to be at this gas station just in time to save Spike and his mom. And there's plenty of instances of this happening in the plot. There's also plenty of times where blood splatters don't matter. In 28 Days Later, it was set up that getting zombie blood splatters close to your face would certainly mean death because it would get into your eyes, your nose, your mouth, and would basically turn you. However, it's very inconsistent in this new film. There were times where zombie blood splatters actually seemed to matter, or sometimes it just didn't really matter at all, or the blood magically just didn't splatter onto someone's face, despite being in close proximity. The military also act like complete morons for the time that they're on screen. I don't like how Aaron Taylor Johnson's character was completely ditched in the second half of this film. So yeah, the narrative has plenty of flaws, but there's plenty of stuff that I did like the stuff in the first 40 minutes, the stuff with Ralph Fiennes' character, and I found Spike to be a very compelling character to where even if the story took a dip in quality, I still was rooting for him, still wanted to see what was going to happen with him. I was still interested. Despite the many issues with the film, I still think there's plenty of positives with it that elevate it to being good. The next movie is Wick is Pain. It's a documentary about the making of the John Wick films. I really love these movies, so it was cool learning about the creation of this franchise. It goes into the history of Chad Stahelski, the director of all the John Wick films, so it functions as a documentary about him coming up in the world of filmmaking. It goes extensively into the troubles that they went through creating the first John Wick. 70% of the doc works as a behind the scenes of all these films, and I really like that stuff. Learning and seeing how they did the cool stunts in each of these films, learning how Gun Fu came to be, seeing them talk about their inspirations and love for the craft of action filmmaking. If you're a fan of the John Wick films, I highly recommend checking out this doc. It's pretty cool. The next movie is F1, and it's pretty much what you expected. The plot isn't anything complicated, it's like any other sports/racing film, and it pretty much embraces those cliches similar to Top Gun Maverick. The story is good enough that you can get behind these characters. The characters are heavily carried by the great actors that are playing them, like Brad Pitt, Damien Idris, Javier Bardem, etc. It's a very simple story of the older, more experienced driver and the young, naive hotshot butting heads, but eventually coming together as the narrative unfolds. The main attraction for this film is the racing, and it completely lives up to it. The racing scenes are super fun and exhilarating, it's very well filmed and edited, Hans Zimmer's frenetic score adds a lot to these scenes, it's a nice mix of his traditional music style and 80s synth. Some elements of the plot are a bit silly, especially when it attempts to have a twist villain that completely fell flat for me, but overall, this is a perfect dad movie. The next movie is Art is for Everybody. This is a documentary about Thomas Kinkade, who is a famous American painter. A lot of his art mainly appealed to Christian, conservative, traditional Americans. However, him appealing and pandering to these crowds led to a lot of criticism, mainly due to a lot of his art being painfully safe or repetitive. He also criticized other people's art for not fitting the bill of American traditions, basically for being countercultural. The doc also went into his many shady business practices and tactics. I went into this doc not knowing anything about Thomas Kinkade or what the subject matter really was, outside of it relating to painting, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. The next film is The Long Walk. It's about these kids who partake in this challenge called The Long Walk. Whoever is the last walker gets a huge prize, and anyone who loses earns a bullet. I really liked most of the characters. They had a solid cast too, with Cooper Hoffman and David Johnson. They all had a solid dynamic, which is a good thing considering 90% of the movie is them walking in a straight line. There's plenty of tense moments throughout the movie. The one that really stuck out to me involved walking up a hill. As for my negatives, the deaths started to get very repetitive, with each of the main characters giving a corny long monologue before dying, and the way that their deaths were shot got very repetitive. I know there's only so much you can really do with the cinematography considering that they're just walking in a straight line, and 90% of the deaths involving being shot in the face, but I still think they could have done more. Most of the cinematography is just serviceable, although I do like seeing Mark Hamill in movies. I don't know if I necessarily buy him as this evil general character. I think he might have been a little bit miscast. Despite the flaws, I still enjoyed it. The next movie is Spinal Tap 2. This is probably the best outcome for a sequel to Spinal Tap. It's cool to see the cast return after decades. The humor is pretty solid, just like the first film. They of course have the same style of humor. The music was good. There were some nice guest appearances from other music artists. It still retains the mockumentary style. I liked how random and subversive the ending was. As a whole, it's not as good as the first film, but it's a worthy sequel. Rest in peace, Rob Reiner. The next movie is The Smashing Machine. This movie is bordering on great, but there's a few things that hold it back.
For the positives, the movie is very uniquely shot.
It feels very documentary-esque. The soundtrack was awesome. I loved how much of it consisted of jazz. The licensed music choices were also good. I don't really see The Rock at all, mainly because of the great makeup, but his acting still played a role in that. The Rock wasn't playing himself again. Emily Blunt was also really good in this. I thought Ryan Bader did a solid job as Mark Coleman. I'm pretty sure this is his first acting gig ever, too. The fights felt very grounded and real. A lot of my problems come with the story, which I still think the story is pretty good, but it has some flaws. I think the relationship between Mark and his girlfriend is very undercooked at times. There's this part in the movie where they have a huge fight, but the next time we see them after a montage, they're back together. I would have liked to see how they resolve their conflict. Another part of the story that I think is undercooked is Mark's addiction to pain meds, which I feel we hardly see him struggling to get clean. It happens really fast, and we never see him ever fighting to not use it. The only time it seems to be an issue is when Mark brings up how much he's struggling. I would have preferred for the movie to show him struggling as opposed to him just saying it. The steroid use is hardly present or brought up in the film when it played a huge part in Mark's real-life fighting, because the steroids did a number on his body, but again, we don't see the consequences of his steroid use, and I'd argue it would have added some good context to his fights in the third act.
And the ending monologue left me very confused as to what it was even trying to say.
Is it about Mark Kerr? Is it about Mark Kerr and Mark Coleman? Is it about their effect on the UFC? What is the point? Again, I still really like this movie, but I think it definitely is a huge step down compared to Benny Safdie's previous work. I was really hoping that this was going to be the Safdie movie that blows me away this year, but it ended up being the other Safdie to do that.
The next film is The Black Phone 2, which I already reviewed in my October video.
The movie is essentially a ripoff of A Nightmare on Elm Street, which I was fine with because I've been clamoring for anything related to that franchise for a while now. It was super well shot, the dream sequences were filmed on lower quality cameras to give these sequences a unique atmosphere. Most of the acting was good. I say mostly because the main character's sister is given a lot of cringeworthy one-liners or cringe swearing.
She's possessed. My God, Mando, isn't it obvious?
I'm not possessed, you judgmental cunt wagon.
Ethan Hawke was of course great as the grabber.
I didn't like how the main character was sidelined for about 40% of it to focus on his sister.
I partly understand why he was sidelined, but it made his arc feel very undercooked.
Despite some of the film's flaws, I still had a decent time with it. The next movie is Predator Badlands. This was a fun action-adventure blockbuster. I liked how they made the Predator the main character. I found his character to be very simple but compelling. Elle Fanning was good. The action sequences were super fun. The CG looked good. I thought the setting was pretty cool. A planet where the creatures in its environment are out to kill you. I thought it was cool that this is the first Predator film to acknowledge the Predators as Yaojas. There was only a few problems I had with it. The humor most of the time took me out of the film because it felt too much like a Marvel movie. The film does its own version of the Groot/Baby Yoda archetype, and it just didn't work for me. It felt out of place for Predator. The synthetics act like complete idiots. Maybe there's a lore reason for it, I don't know. All in all though, I had a fun time with it. The next film is After the Hunt. I think the hate for this movie is definitely overblown. I thought the overall story was good, though not as interesting as some of Luca Guadagnino's previous work. It's about this teacher who gets accused of sexual assault, and we as the audience are trying to figure out the validity of these accusations. The acting was good all around, especially Andrew Garfield. He was awesome in it. With it being a Luca Guadagnino film, it has a very unique style that you'd come to expect. There's also this neat Sergeant Rock Easter egg because Luca was going to direct a Sergeant Rock movie until it got canned. The only complaints I can think of is that I didn't think Ao was that good in the movie. Not as bad as film Twitter was making it out to be, but I think her acting could have been better. Maybe the themes could have been conveyed a lot better, but overall I liked it. The next film is Good Fortune, just a good, simple, charming comedy movie. 70 to 80% of the jokes worked for me. I wasn't rolling on the floor laughing, but it was serviceable. I thought the story was fun, with Keanu Reeves as this guardian angel, who switches the lives of Aziz Ansari's character and Seth Rogen's character to teach him lessons. Again, not the most mind-blowing comedy, but it gets the job done well. The next film is Christy. It's about the real-life story of Christy Martin, who gains fame in the female boxing space. However, it's mainly about the dark shit that happened between the boxing. I thought Sydney Sweeney did a really good job transforming herself into this character. She apparently added some weight for the character and trained for the role, and it really shows. The boxing scenes were really well filmed and executed. The most interesting sides of the story are the darker and more insane stuff that involves Ben Foster's character, who was fantastic as this sleazy, slimy, and downright evil husband who manipulates Christy for most of the film. The only issue I had with the movie is that it felt a little bit too long, but overall, it was a good sports biopic that wasn't afraid to get into the extremely bleak parts of a person's story, unlike most biopics. The next movie is Rental Family. It's about this working actor who gets this gig where he acts in people's lives, which can range from him pretending to be someone's friend or pretending to be a journalist. And he gets multiple of these gigs, but the one that's most important is where he has to pretend to be a father. And despite him just acting, he really gets attached to these people. It's always nice to see Brendan Fraser back on the big screen. He's great in everything he does, and it's no different here. I thought the movie did a lot of interesting things with the premise. I thought Fraser's character arc was super compelling. I really liked all the other supporting characters too, mainly the people who Fraser was hired for to act. It gets pretty cheesy, corny, overly sentimental at times, but it didn't stop me from feeling good walking out of it. The next movie is Urchin. It's about this homeless man in London trying to rebuild his life. This is Harris Dickinson's directorial debut, who acted in The Iron Claw and Baby Girl. I didn't really connect with this as much as a lot of other people, but I respect the film. It's very well shot. It has this indie, low-budget style that I mess with. I liked how the main character's arc was very much all over the place. Rebuilding one's life isn't a constant straight line, and I think the movie did that well. The movie felt very grounded, realistic, and authentic. There aren't really any flaws I can think of other than I wasn't personally invested as much as a lot of people were who were in love with this movie, but I thought the movie was well put together. The next film is Pools. It's a coming-of-age story about this girl who's trying to get her life back together, or she's gonna get kicked out of college. And along the way, she gets a group of college friends together and they jump into random people's pools. I thought it was a fun, charming movie. The character dynamics were solid. It was fun to explore and learn about each of these characters, and there's a good balance of comedic bits and character work. There's also a character in the film who kinda exists as a running gag, but later on plays a huge part in the third act, and I really liked that. I liked how vibrant this movie felt and looked. Overall, this was a nice, heartwarming film. The next film is Knives Out 3, and I think this is a bit better than the second film, but not as good as the first. It's another fun whodunit film. It's got the twists, turns, and surprises that you'd come to expect from these. It's very sharp looking and has a great soundtrack. Josh O'Connor's character is probably my favorite protagonist out of all the Knives Out films. I think he's the most layered and compelling. Daniel Craig is once again amazing as this very over-the-top detective. I was surprised at how well they handled the religious aspect of this film. I thought this was essentially going to be r/atheism the movie, but it ended up handling this aspect with good care, showing different angles and perspectives to how different people perceive Christianity. It's not groundbreaking, but I appreciate the solid effort. I think the weakest aspect of the film is the supporting cast, which also was the weakest part of the previous film, which sucks because I felt that the characters in the first movie had plenty of depth and characterization. It made the mystery more engaging because you like and understand these characters, and it really builds up to the anticipation of who the culprit is. Whereas in these last two films, the supporting cast have hardly any depth, and it makes the mysteries less interesting and shocking as a result. The humor also feels completely out of place, especially when you have Josh O'Connor's character, who feels very real and authentic, and then you throw in a weird MCU Deadpool tier joke that just doesn't jive well and completely falls flat.
I've masturbated 4 times this week, 4 or 5 generally, and what I say, 6 weeks? Well, let's say 30 times masturbated. This week in my bed. Once in the middle of the night after a dream about
one of those Japanese cat cafes.
Okay.
Even though it's quite flawed, I still thought it was a fun murder mystery. The next film is Devo. It's a documentary about the creation of the Devo band. Despite not knowing anything about them, I was still quite interested. And I'm not really a huge fan of their music, judging by the stuff that I heard in the doc, but I respect them. It was cool to learn how much of their music was rich in political undertones and philosophy. I mean, it's in their name, which is short for de-evolution. They were super experimental not only in their music, but in pioneering so much stuff that is considered normal by today's standards. The big one is the music videos that they would make all the time, but the thing is that music vids weren't popular at the time, so they just sat on these videos for a while. They were always pushing boundaries and were very avant-garde, and they were always trying to say something about the world's climate. I went into this doc knowing nothing and left with a deep admiration. The next movie is The Plague. It's about these kids at this water polo camp who avoid this one kid for having something they call the plague. The main character decides to befriend the plague kid, which leads to him essentially getting blacklisted. The plague is used as an allegory or metaphor for how cliquish kids are at this young age, where if you go to talk to or sit with a kid who is perceived as a weird kid or a kid with the plague, then you're weird. The plague aspect is used to explore bullying and letting others dictate how you want to be perceived. I think a lot of us can relate to the experience of the main character at this age. I thought all the child acting was pretty good. I liked how all the dialogue made them sound like kids, like the immature humor or the stupid shit we would say at that age. It felt very authentic. I really liked the cinematography. There's plenty of good long takes. There were shots that captured all the things that they needed in the scene and didn't bother to cut. There was also a good use of blue in the film. There were maybe a few complaints that I had with the story, mainly some character decisions. There's one I can think of that isn't really a spoiler at all, but it involves this kid swearing at a coach out of anger, and he was being quite nasty and the coach didn't do anything. No punishment, didn't even bother to kick him out of the pool. That was the only thing that took me out of the film. Overall though, it was a solid coming-of-age story. The next movie is This Thing On? This is probably the best movie that Bradley Cooper has ever made, which isn't saying much, but I think it's yards better. It's about this guy who's going through a divorce and starts going to comedy clubs and airing out his thoughts in a comedic presentation. I really like the style of this movie. It mostly consists of these long handheld takes. The movie knew when to hold the long take and when to cut to a different angle. I liked the pacing of the film. It made it feel like a hangout movie at times. I thought all the acting was really good and naturalistic. Will Arnett was perfect in this role. As for my issues, I think the movie could have been trimmed down a bit and tighter. Some of the scenes felt repetitive, or some scenes could have been completely cut out. And I'm not 100% sure if I really liked the ending. But I thought it was a solid movie. And the last movie is Dead Man's Wire. It's about a true story in the 70s of a man who takes a hostage by rigging a shotgun to his neck, demanding money and justice. The movie nails the 70s aesthetic down pretty well, down to the cameras and the old-sounding audio in the newsreels. Bill Skarsgård gives a great performance playing this unhinged lunatic, and his accent's pretty on point. The movie felt like a Diet Dog Day afternoon. The structure felt similar to that movie also, but at least it was well executed. The only flaw that I had with the film is that the tone was a bit wonky at times. There's bits of humor that work, but other times it completely messed with the tension. This movie overall was a solid return from Gus Van Sant. And that's the end of this video. I don't know when the final part will be out, but hopefully by next month. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.